Okay, in this video we're going to talk about graphing y equals tan x and y equals cotangent x. And I tried to just give you some bullet points of like what to do next in case you get lost. But first we're going to find two consecutive asymptotes, find an x-intercept that's midway between the two asymptotes, and then find points that are a fourth of the way and 3/4 of the way between asymptotes. One thing is that we're going to remember the tangent's undefined, meaning it has asymptotes at odd multiples of pi over 2. And the examples we're going to use to start often are going to be negative pi over 2 and pi over 2. And you'll see what I mean more in just a moment when I get to the examples. Cotangents undefined at multiples of pi, such as 0, pi, 2 pi, so on and so forth. But in particular, we're going to use these, and you'll see what I mean when we work examples. Okay, so for example, this first one we have 5 tan of 2x. Now, tangent, the general form of this is a tan omega x minus phi. Now this is a, and that phi could be a little bit better, so let me, phi. Okay, this is a phase shift, which we're not going to do a whole lot with that now, but I'm just going to put this here, so in the next lesson, I believe it's in 2.6, when we get to that, we'll kind of be familiar with it. To find amplitude, it's the absolute value of A. That's very similar to what we've done before, but the period this time, specifically, I want to highlight that it's going to be pi over omega for tangent and cotangent, because remember, the period's different. For all the other 4 trig functions, it was 2 pi over omega, so make sure you remember that. And in this particular case, for our example, omega is 2, so that would be pi over 2 would be the period. But let's use our steps in the procedure we have outlined here to tackle this y equals tangent x and y equals cotangent x. Alright, so for part A, when we're finding consecutive asymptotes, we're going to take our omega x minus phi right here, which in this case it's 2x, and the phi is just 0. There's nothing there. So this isn't relevant anyway, so we would say whatever omega x minus phi equal to negative pi over 2 and pi over 2. And I'm just going to write all these steps out formal just so we have that and have some consistency. Because it's tangent x, I'm going to set it equal to negative pi over 2 and pi over 2 because that's where it's undefined. So I'm looking for my asymptotes, and that's why I use these two values. Okay, for our particular example, our omega x minus phi is just 2x minus 0. So we're just going to have, for our example, we have 2x is equal to negative pi over 2. And then I'm going to have 2x is equal to positive pi over 2. So I'm going to find one asymptote using this one. I'm going to find one asymptote using this value. And then we just cross multiply, or actually solve for x. So we're going to divide by 2. So I would just get x is equal to negative pi over 2 divided by 2 is negative pi over 4. Or you can say multiply by the reciprocal. Multiply by the reciprocal, that's the same thing as dividing by 2, so you can see where that negative pi over 4 comes in. Let's do the same thing over here. Multiply by the reciprocal so that these 2's will cancel, and we're left with x is equal to pi fourths. Okay, so we have vertical asymptotes at negative pi fourths and positive pi fourths. That was our part A, find two consecutive asymptotes. Part B is find an x-intercept that's midway between the two asymptotes. Okay, so we'll do part B here. So if one vertical asymptote is negative pi fourths and the other one is pi fourths, you add them together and divide by 2 to get the middle, right? To find the midpoint of something. So if you have negative pi fourths and you add pi fourths, we get 0, and then we want to divide it by 2 to find the middle, so you're just going to get 0 is the midpoint of those two asymptotes. Okay, so find the x-intercept that's midway between the asymptotes. So the x-intercept is x equals 0. And I'm just going to yield and I'll say x equals 0. Okay, that's the information we need. And then part C says find a port 1/4 of the way and 3/4 of the way between the asymptotes. So we'll do part C on this page. So C. Okay, so let's just look at what we found so far. We found a vertical asymptote to be here. Well, and we found a vertical asymptote to be here. We found midway between these two, which ended up being 0, so that's our midpoint. And the next thing we want to look for is 1/4 of the way and 3/4 of the way. So we're looking for the blue. And one way we can do that is if I go from 0 to pi fourths and divide that half of that, so I can just pi fourths divide by 2, which is the same thing as divide is multiplying by the reciprocal, so that puts me at pi eighths. So pi eighths is here. Okay, and if that's pi eighths, then between here and here, 0 and negative pi fourths is just going to be negative pi eighths. Okay, so there's multiple ways. There's lots of ways to find 1/4 of the way. So if I start here, 1/4 of the way, half, 3/4 of the way, those values. But anyway, so we found those values. So let's go back. Check, check, check. And then the next things we want to do is plug in and find specific values for this. Now let me go back and remember my equation. Let's keep in mind what we're graphing, 5, 10 of 2x. So we're going to be working with an amplitude of 5 and an amplitude of -5. Well, it's not necessarily amplitude in this case, but for the same description, it's our A value. Okay, and I want to set up an XY table with these particular points. So I'm going to do 0, pi eighths, negative pi eighths. Okay, does this look familiar to you? All right, let's plug in y equals 5 times the tangent of 2 times negative pi eighths. Okay, so without having to do all this, this is what we've done before, and I just kind of put it there. Using our method to approach it this way, finding our 1/4, 3/4, and the x-intercept, we essentially found those particular points. So we know that tangent is increasing to the right. Sorry, our parent graph looks like that. So no matter what, we're going to look like that. And then 3/4 of the way puts us here. So it's negative pi eighths, -5. That's how I know that point goes there. Midpoint is 0. And that's 1/4 of the way, midpoint, and then 3/4 of the way is going to be up here at the 5, and because we know it's tangent, we know it's going to increase to the right like that. Okay, now if you need verification, you can come use this chart that we did before using the sine and the cosine, but that's not necessarily necessary in this particular case for us to do our sketches. We can use our finding our asymptotes, find the midpoint, find the 1/4 of the way and 3/4 of the way, and then use our A values, the absolute value of our A values, to sketch our graph of tan function. This is just extra for verification so that you can see this is true.